Shopping malls in Florida in the 1970s felt like cold air after white glare, fountain noise after traffic, and freedom measured in quarters, ride times. It felt free, yet every lap still depended on one small rule: who had the car, how much money you had, and when you had to be home. In this state, mall life ran on three things people still remember: the week's paycheck and careful budgeting, the mall as a meeting ground for errands and social life, and the lifestyle signals that made Florida feel like Florida, from pastel department store colors to sunscreen and fryer oil mixed together. From Kendall on the southbound drive to Hialeah on the family errand loop, from Altamonte Mall to University Square Mall and Volusia Mall, the state was turning inward under one roof, and by the next decade, that easy wandering would feel more watched and less innocent. What you are really walking back into is not one trip, but a ladder of familiar steps. Hearing the plan, waiting on the ride, stepping in through the anchor store, drifting toward food and music, deciding what you could afford, and building toward that packed Saturday moment when the whole place seemed to glow at once. This story is built from period ads, store flyers, local photos, and common memories. The trip often started at the kitchen table. A folded store circular sat near the salt shaker. Somebody marked a sale, and the talk was half practical, half hopeful. Maybe you needed school shoes, maybe church clothes, maybe only a look around if payday had not stretched far enough. Many families treated the mall like a machine with a strict order: paycheck first, bills next, maybe a layaway payment after that, then a few dollars for a child or teenager if the week had gone right. If you had your own part-time money, every ride, snack, and small purchase had to be weighed. By Tuesday, somebody had mentioned Saturday. By Thursday, the ride was still uncertain. By Friday, the question was simple: who is driving? That was the first limit of mall freedom in 1970s Florida. You could feel grown as soon as you heard you were going, but you still waited on a parent, an older cousin, or a friend with the more reliable car. Early in the decade, that wait still carried novelty, because the big enclosed malls felt new enough to be an event. Late in the decade, the ride felt more crowded, more routine, and harder to arrange. Then came the parking lot and the relief of the first door opening. You might enter through Burdine's with its tropical look, palms and sea colors, telling you this was built for Florida, not borrowed from somewhere colder. Or you came in through Moss Brothers or Jordan Marsh, each one setting a tone before you even touched a rack. One adult line usually set the terms, "Do not get lost." Once you crossed inside, the day changed shape. Inside, the mall solved the weather by pretending weather no longer mattered. The air above you hummed with cooling equipment. Light dropped through skylights instead of street windows. The floor widened toward a fountain or opened into a conversation pit where people slowed down just to look. Seniors had already claimed the place earlier that morning, walking flat laps before the stores opened and then sitting with coffee that could cost around a quarter. Early on, the place felt almost leisurely. Later in the decade, it felt more managed. By lunch, the rhythm shifted to trays, paper cups, and fryer oil. In plenty of malls, the meal was still more cafeteria than modern food court, and Morrison's cafeteria felt respectable enough for a family stop after errands, with items often around 39 cents each. Nearby, an orange Julius stood as a reward disguised as a drink. A parent might say, "That is enough." Morning had belonged to walkers and list makers. Noon belonged to families, teenagers, and anybody stretching the outing a little longer. You learned the place by drifting. Past jewelry counters you were told not to touch. Past Camelot music, where the speakers turned the concourse into a soundtrack. past appliance displays where an 8-track player could sit in the ballpark of $24.88 to $38.88. Past clothing racks where boys' Levi's could run around $2.50 to $3.33, an Arrow shirt might fall around $6 to $12, and a polyester pantsuit could sit around $10.99 under lights that made everything look slightly grander than it would at home. That was also where the rules of money showed themselves in public. Layaway was a real desk, a real line, and a real cardboard payment book slid across the counter after a deposit, often around 10 to 20%. You did not take the item home. The store held it, and you came back every 2 weeks if life stayed on track. Do not miss your payment. Early in the decade, that ritual felt patient. By the late 1970s, with prices biting harder, the same counter could tighten your whole mood. Right there, after that small victory of getting something set aside for later, is where many people stay with this channel, because this is how we keep walking back through places and decades the way they were actually lived. By mid-afternoon, the trip became less about errands and more about orbit. You circled back to the fountain. You checked who had arrived. You drifted toward the snack counter, then away, then back again. Here is the receipt moment you can still feel: a folded bill, a few coins, and the mental total forming before the cashier speaks. A drink, maybe a snack, maybe one small extra thing. Not all three. So you skip the bigger want, choose the cold treat anyway, and it feels earned because you counted it first. Do you have exact change? Sometimes you did. One memory from that world still lands hard. The ride nearly fell through because somebody had to make an extra stop. You sat in the car too long, wondering if the day was shrinking into a dull errand run. Then the doors opened, the cold air hit, and the disappointment broke. You went in with less time than you wanted. You promised to stay near the middle. You saw familiar faces near the fountain before you had even chosen a direction. Somebody lifted a paper cup like a signal. Somebody else already had a shopping bag cutting into their fingers. You tried on one thing you probably were not buying. You checked the record store anyway. By the time you met back where you were told, the afternoon felt bigger than the clock that had threatened to ruin it. That was the trick of the place. It gave short time a big shape. Sometimes the proof of how fast Florida changed sat right under your feet. In the early 1970s, new enclosed malls and newly enclosed older ones remade shopping habits, and the 1973 enclosure of Dadeland Mall made it clear that the open breezeway was giving way to fully managed indoor space. Mid-decade, the huge regional centers spread through the state with rolling openings that let one anchor start business while the rest of the complex was still coming alive. Then you were back in the stream again, passing more bags and more people who had come for one thing and stayed for 5. The slower parts of shopping had their own sounds. At one register, a clerk pressed your parents' embossed charge card into a zip-zap machine and dragged the metal bar across a carbon slip. At another, a checkbook came out, then a pause, then a signature, then the little wait that felt normal because everything took longer then. Adding machine tape curled beside the till like paper ribbon. Early on, those delays felt like the ordinary pace of life. Later in the decade, under inflation and brighter crowds, the same pauses could feel like friction. Toward late afternoon, the mall showed every pillar at once. The money pillar was there in receipts, change, and the careful handling of bags. The community pillar was there in the way school friends, church families, retirees, and young workers all crossed the same polished floor. The lifestyle pillar was there in what people carried: a shirt box, a cassette or 8-track case, a cup sweating in one hand, a paper bag with cord handles in the other. The small drama might be losing sight of your group for one uneasy minute. The payoff was spotting them where you hoped they would be. As the crowd thickened, the mall itself became the attraction. You had the scent mix people still name without help: perfume, cooled air, sunscreen left over from outside, fryer oil, and new fabric. Store speakers pushed rock through the corridors. The fountain covered the mechanical hum and made the whole building feel more public than it really was. Early decade malls could still seem almost leisurely. By the end of the 1970s, the same square felt faster, fuller, and more competitive for your attention. And then the destination arrived, the moment everything had been building toward. A packed Saturday at Dadeland Mall, the fountain throwing light upward, shopping bags marking the miles you had already walked, and the whole place feeling bigger because you earned your way through it. The ride had come through. The rules had been negotiated. The money had been counted. The anchors, snack stops, and little detours all fed this one feeling that adults and teenagers both knew. You were out in the world, but still inside the glow of it. One voice from earlier echoed anyway. Be back at the car. Freedom, but timed. Choice, but counted. Florida Mall life in one scene. Night changed the spell on the way home. The bags came inside first. Shoes landed near the wall. A receipt stayed in a pocket until laundry day. The kitchen sounded quiet after the mall, with only plates and the refrigerator hum. The outing had ended, but the evidence of it sat on the chair, the counter, and the floor by the door. Yet the decade did not end gently. Rising prices pressed the first pillar, so every treat and layaway promise carried more weight. Bigger chains and bigger regional centers pressed the second pillar, gathering more life under one roof, while older downtown habits kept fading. And in South Florida especially, the illusion of the mall as a sealed sanctuary cracked after the 1979 violence at Dadeland, when the fear of the era reached straight into a shopping day and made security feel less theatrical and more real. Early in the decade, the mall felt fresh, almost leisurely, and full of possibility. Late in the decade, it felt brighter, busier, more expensive, and a little less innocent. That is why shopping malls in Florida in the 1970s stay in memory so vividly. They looked like freedom, but they were a balance of paychecks, rides, timing, and permissions wrapped in cold air and colored light. In the next decade, more security, more chain sameness, and changing habits would shift the rhythm again. What do you remember most clearly? The fountain pennies, the store circular, the orange Julius, the layaway book, or the sentence somebody always said before you walked off?